este campamento oficiado por OCLC y la Escuela Graduada de Ciencias y Tecnologías de la Información. Repito, bienvenidos, buenos días. Les damos la bienvenida a este campamento oficiado por OCLC y la Escuela Graduada de Ciencias y Tecnologías de la Información. Vamos a hacer un repasito de la agenda. Me informan que la agenda vamos a hacer un repaso de la agenda, ¿no? Para saber si ha habido algún cambio. De momento no hay ningún cambio. Tendremos dos actividades, dos presentaciones durante la mañana, un receso a media mañana y continuamos por la tarde. Bien. Tenemos, como ha señalado la doctora Vigo, aquí la presencia de tres miembros del personal de OCLC, tres miembros destacados del personal de OCLC. Tenemos en primer lugar al señor Daniel Boivin, director ejecutivo de OCLC para las Américas, para todas las Américas. Tenemos al señor Edwar Delgado, que es el gerente de ventas para Latinoamérica y el Caribe de OCLC. Y tenemos al señor Childress, que es consultor de proyectos de investigación en OCLC. Bien. OCLC es una organización sin fines de lucro dedicada a avanzar la organización y el acceso a la información mediante la cooperación bibliotecaria. Desde la creación a finales de los años 60 de la primera plataforma de catalogación cooperativa en línea desarrollada en la Biblioteca Alden de la Universidad de Ohio, han pasado 48 años. En la actualidad, OCLC dispone del catálogo más grande del mundo, con más de 347 millones de registros bibliográficos que son aportados por bibliotecas no solo de las Américas, sino de Europa, de Asia, de Oceanía y de África. Es el mayor proyecto cooperativo que existe. Y también dispone de diversos productos y servicios diseñados para organizar y descubrir información, compartir recursos y desarrollar repositorios de investigación. Además, OCLC participa activamente en prácticamente todas las iniciativas encaminadas a mejorar el acceso a la información y a mantener la relevancia de nuestras bibliotecas en un mundo cambiante. Así, mantiene acuerdos con diversos proveedores de contenidos, con Google, con Wikipedia, y colabora con las nuevas reglas de catalogación, Resource, Discovery and Access, así como con los proyectos dedicados al desarrollo de modelos de Linked Data encaminados a sustituir al formato MARC. Además, OCLC realiza constantemente diversas investigaciones que nos permiten conocer mejor a nuestros usuarios. Y estas investigaciones están todas disponibles a través de Internet para su descarga. A lo largo de este campamento, varios miembros destacados del equipo de trabajo de OCLC nos acercarán a sus servicios y a los proyectos en los cuales está participando. En primer lugar, vamos a tener una presentación titulada At a Tipping Point, Education, Learning and Libraries. Se trata de un informe, el más reciente informe preparado por OCLC, específicamente por el personal de mercadeo de OCLC, liderado por Katy de Rosa, que ha hecho unos informes magníficos, muy valiosos para nuestra profesión y para mantenernos al día. En dicho estudio se examina la percepción de los estudiantes universitarios sobre sus bibliotecas y el papel que éstas deben jugar en la educación a distancia. Y además se discuten las estrategias que pueden ser más efectivas para que las bibliotecas sigan siendo relevantes en lo que se denomina la nueva era de la educación. Para hablarnos del informe, el tipping point, les dejo al señor Daniel Boivin, director ejecutivo de OCLC para las Américas. Daniel.
Buenos días a todos. Yo hablo solo un poco en español, so I'll switch to English if you allow me. But you're lucky, we'll have sessions in English and in Spanish when my colleague Edwar Delgado will also do his portion. So we'll be bilingual because between all of us, we can be bilingual. So thank you very much to Dr. Luisa for inviting us today to present to you various topics that we have identified as hopefully being useful for your professional life, your professional career. I have the chance to start with presenting this most recent report that we published at OCLC last year. I was not involved with gathering the data or writing the report, but I'm extremely happy to present it to you. I've been talking with those of my colleagues that have produced the report, and I believe there should be sometimes, even though there's quite a bit of information I'll be sharing with you today, there should be sometimes for some questions at the end. I hope it depends on how quickly I can deliver this. I don't want to do it too quickly either, just to make sure everybody will understand me, because I also have a strong accent. I'm French to start with, so that's why there's an accent here. But let's see how that goes, and definitely we're here all day, so if you have questions later on, that will be great. And thank you very much to the university as well to accommodate us and have us over to present today. All right, so anyone remember seeing these kinds of advertisements? I see some gray hair, so probably some of you do remember. It used to be out there, and during those days, that was the concept of distance education that some of us have seen. Opportunities to enhance a skill, to learn a trade, or even earn a college degree from home have existed for many years. But today, this is kind of the advertisement that we're seeing about the various education being offered on the web. So what's different today? Well, I think everybody can first say technology is probably a big difference with what we saw 20, 30, 40 years ago. Thanks to enterprises such as edX or Coursera or Khan Academy, they're all waiting for you to join. They're all waiting for you to sign up for some courses. Opportunities to get educated on nearly any topic are readily available to almost everyone. Our report title At the Tipping Point is titled At the Tipping Point in Education. But why do we feel we are at a tipping point? Is it simply because we have more advanced technology now that allows us to educate at a scale? Or is there more to it than just the technology? We believe there is at OCLC, and I'm going to share more about that as we go, or as I go through the presentation with you. We know that in an environment where anything a person wants to learn, like Khan Academy pretends, it's just a click away. It is paramount that libraries understand, or perhaps I should say define, where they fit, where we fit in this new world. This is the driving purpose of all the market research OCLC has done on behalf of our members. We want to help libraries, helping libraries explore the environments in which their users operate and where the library might connect better. That's really why we're doing all of these market surveys at OCLC. Over the last decade, we have done a variety of work exploring topics that we know all will impact the libraries we serve. we have been particularly interested in the perceptions and behaviors of our current and potential users. That work started at OCLC in 2003, sorry if you have followed us a little bit, when we began to track what we called back then the information consumer. This was the time when the internet was gathering some steam. At the time, we began to see our end users as truly consumers of information on the web. I bring up here this timeline because we have done this work for over 10 years at OCLC, and we now have data sets that helps us see changes in behaviors during this window of time. The work being shared today is our latest study, as I said, and the title of the book is At a Tipping Point, Education, Learning, and Libraries. In addition to the attitudes of the information consumer, we are excited now to talk about what we're calling the education consumer. This end user that we have been working with in our schools, in our communities, is now taking all the behaviors and all the things they have learned so far in their online life and are now applying that to education. We believe that some very interesting things are happening that are going to shape education, how we think about learning and self-education, and certainly what it means for libraries in this process. The report is the sum of two pieces of work. One, a very large-scale survey we completed in January 2014 with about 3,700 individuals, and the other that we did a couple of years ago in 2013. The second was specifically looking at what education consumers, those that are paying for education, the parents and the alumni most of the time, and what they thought about various aspects of the campuses, including on-campus libraries. After we finished that work, we knew we needed to explore the online learning movement to provide a better and a more complete analysis. So we conducted this US survey. It was not only in the US this time, because sometimes we go outside the United States, but this time it was done in the US. So I will talk with this presentation about what we learn on online learning, what we are learning about libraries, and what we think will make sense for us to consider as a community going forward. And of course, this report, like any of the others, is available on the web. I have my own copy, who's a little damaged here, but we have a few additional copies here for you today. So before I start digging into the report, let me mention that in the midst of doing all of this work and looking at what is going on in education and on campus, some really interesting things were happening in the community on the web. One of those was Starbucks. That's the logo you have here. They were announcing a partnership with the Arizona State University to provide free education to their 100,000 plus employees at Starbucks. This was pretty amazing to hear about this to my colleagues that were compiling and writing the report, because even though there have certainly been benefits of education reimbursement by corporation before, this is the first time that we have seen such a large-scale partnership between a corporation and an institution of higher education with the goal of providing all of the company's employees the opportunity to earn a college degree at no cost to them. Earlier this year, as of early 2015, there was 2,200 Starbucks employees that were enrolled. Another 1,800 had applied, and out of these numbers, 200 were expected to graduate this year. And unlike any college students, really, those guys that are going to graduate won't have any loan or any debts at the end. So that's a great deal, a great benefit for Starbucks employees. So let me start with this listing of verbatims that we've gathered in the survey. Because everyone is aware that the cost of education, and that linked to my Starbucks comment, everyone is aware that the cost of education continues to rise. One of the things we did in the end user portion of the study was to ask people's perceptions of a college education. If you recall, we did that in the past also by asking about perceptions of libraries. So the study had a number of open-ended questions as usual. And the opening question for this that we had was, what do you think of a college education? So what you see on the screen is just some of the feedback we've received. But overwhelmingly, we saw that the perceptions of college education today is being dominated by the idea of cost. Is this something surprising to you? Probably not, yes. Because, it's probably not surprising, because the top of mind perceptions of parents and current college students and incoming college students was a very pragmatic view of education today. It wasn't necessarily lifelong learning, it wasn't personal enrichment, it really was cost that was the concern there. More precisely, the top of mind for parents was their own debt or their children's debt in the process. As for the college students, while cost or the debt they could generate was also high on their list, their number one was, will I get a job after that, right? To pay for the debt, probably. So in this area, one of the things that parents and college students shared with us was that, yes, the cost of a college education is high, but more importantly is that the value or the cost trade-off between what we're getting and what we're paying is out of balance, and not just by a little based on the comments we've received. This slide shows us that of the parents that are paying for a college education today, only 4% thought that the price and the value trade-off for a private education were in balance. Public institutions did better, but not by much. And community colleges, the two-year institutions, they ranked a little higher here. But what we're seeing is this belief that not only is the cost continuing to accelerate, but it's out of balance at such a rate that is probably not sustainable, at least for most places in the United States. This was true of the college students and almost identical to the parents. I mentioned up front that we have been able to track the information consumer for over 10 years at OCLC. This lets us recognize changes, bigger changes and small changes in some fashion. So the reason we believe we are at an interesting tipping point in education and for libraries is that we have been able to identify that big change happens when three things come into alignment. More precisely, when we start to see consumer behavior, technology, and economic incentives all come together. In that moment, we all can point to changes that happen in our environment. Normally, when we see consumer behaviors change, a new technology comes out or economic shifts happen. But really interesting things happen when these three things come together. I've already talked a little bit about the economic incentives, and clearly that is a driver globally. With information consumers having amassed significant online and self-service skills, internet use is now nearly ubiquitous across ages, income, and education levels. So we want to turn today's discussion at the other two incentives listed here and find out what is happening in the consumer behaviors and technologies. And we believe that the big change is on its way once these three really hit each other, if I can say it that way. So as we start to look at the behaviors area, one of the things we can observe, which is a fabulous step forward for the library community, is that we are starting to see the digital gap begin to close. As we know, we began to track the information consumer and their use of social networking back in 2007. 2003 for the reports and 2007 for the social networking use in general. What you see is that the orange bars are the use of social networking by income in the States. Back then, the use of social networking was higher for lower income levels, but by 2014, what we start to see is a great leveling by income. And education levels show similar results. High school students are still number one using social networking and those elements on the web, but across all education levels, social networking is pervasive. Even across ages now, there's an enormous shift. Those 36 or older saw the biggest growth during those 7 years. But we also tracked this for internet use, mobile use, and find many of the same trends in those areas. What we are seeing is the narrowing of the divide related to online and social activities. What this is also telling us is that we have a community now where behaviors and use of services are becoming almost ubiquitous, and that drives one of those bars of a tipping point as being better understood, and that bar is the behavior one, if you recall the three that were shown a few minutes ago. But you're probably all wondering, how does all of this translate to online learning, right? So this survey is the first time we have reported on online learning at OCLC. So what you see on the screen here is the percentage of the community in our study that told us they have done some type of online learning. Nearly half of our respondents who were online said they have taken some type of either a class, a degree, or a non-degree, some sort of tutorial, some sort of work-based activity, or some type of online learning. It's interesting to look at the age segments here. By the age group of 25 to 35, they are very traditional. The age group of 25-35, are where traditional college age and early career people fall. So the bump there makes sense. But what you really see is that at this level adoption rate, the education consumer and online learner group highlights a whole community, a whole state or a whole nation moving forward together. And we think this is going to be important relative to how fast and how large we are going to see those changes in education. When we defined online learning, we really covered the gamut. In addition to learning for a degree, we are showing here what we learned about what folks wanted to do for personal growth or work-related or continuing education. And what was really fascinating about this was when we started to ask people what it was they were doing online. There's just an example of it on the screen here, and this shows that it's everything and across all different age levels as well. So one of the things we saw was that students who were very busy working on degrees also did things for creativity, did things for their own hobbies, for health related, and so on. So the idea that we're beginning to consume education in a different way and in different approaches, which we will talk about, is clearly evident with these results. Online learning is not just about what is happening in the academy in general, but it's what is happening at large as well. The adoption and use is one thing, but if you look at these satisfaction rates with online learning, it gets also very interesting. It was one of the things in the study that amazed my colleagues the most, and that was that the satisfaction rates were very, very high, no matter what the purpose was or the age of the respondents was. So what do you think we are seeing both an uptake and a satisfaction within online learning? We had many verbatim comments for the surveys, and they're very telling in general. This one here sort of sums up the overall expression of why is it we see this great appetite. Information consumers now feel power in their ability to find information for themselves, and we're seeing that absolutely also translate for education. You know, knowledge is power, and they now have a way to access that power themselves. I'm sure that we're going to see this appetite grow, as I've mentioned already, for education. So to that end, when we asked people what were the top benefits of online learning, no matter the environment and the platforms they were using, it was clear that the answer was convenience. This is the same thing we've learned about the information consumer in previous studies we did at OCLC. Why were they so excited about using Google or using Wikipedia and not the library portal, for example? Because that was easy and convenient. That trumps everything. So we saw this across every category of online learning as well, whether it was for getting a degree or a non-degree. So from this chart, I don't know if you can see it at the back, some of those numbers sometimes are a little small, but it looks like Starbucks is now an emerging classroom, as well as a coffee shop. Many people are going there to learn. Oops, let me go back. So it's not surprising that our houses are where we learn online most of the time, whether again for a degree or a non-degree or for work. So it's interesting to note that both public and academic libraries rated at about the same levels for where they want to do their online education, which increase our opportunity for the library community to work together on this lifelong online education consumer opportunity. That's why maybe libraries still need to keep silent or have areas that are more quiet. So how does this fit in online learning? How does the shift, sorry, not fit, but shift in online learning integrate with a campus experience? We are very interested in what that means to the library specifically. But before we look at this, I wanted to share that the on-campus experience is still very important to the citizens in general that are getting ready to go to college or universities. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we did 2 pieces of research. And one was to spend some time understanding the on-campus experience. So if we are headed to a future where half or more of what we are going to do is going to end up online, what does that mean for the college campus or the university campus? And then very specifically, what does that mean for libraries? What does that mean for the library on campus? So this particular slide notes that an on-campus experience continues to absolutely matter to households, both the parents and the college students today, and also the high school students getting ready to go to college and university. In our verbatim comments, what people shared with us, in addition to the learning part, was that they wanted to be sure that they themselves or their children had what they call the total life experience of an on-campus education. So the brick and mortar part still is important, it seems like. What about the perceptions of the overall campus life? Well, to find out more, we asked the following question to the participants in our study of perceptions of the campus life. So the question was, when you think about the different aspects of campus life, like things like sports, classroom, fraternity, the library, what are your top perceptions on those particular elements? For example, when you think about the campus coffee shops, what would be the words to describe it? So we gave participants a set of perceptions or descriptions and asked them to match those perceptions to those particular aspects of the campus life. Once we got the answers back, we used a technique called the perceptions mapping with the help of a firm called Glassbox Research that lays out domains of perceptions and their strongest levels of associations. What does that really mean? Well, if you look at the screen in the upper left-hand corner, and again, that's a bit small probably for those of you at the back, but it says campus coffee shop. And just below it is what people said when we asked what were their perceptions of the campus coffee shops. So you have things like, again, convenience, places to work as a group, important part of my everyday life, safe haven, and so on. And that's what's illustrated here. Those were the things most associated with the campus coffee shops. This is not to say that, for example, convenience was not also associated with something else. But what the mind maps helps us do is to create the strongest associations. Now, if we were to step back and look at the axis on the map, what we learned from this study is that there were associations that people thought about and were related to their experience on campus, accrued to the academy or themselves personally, and that's the vertical axis, and rather that was extracurricular or academic activities, and that's the horizontal axis, which together constitute the 4 quadrants you see, and that goes back to that perceptions mapping technique. So if we look at the map, it can tell us a little bit about the perceptions of that overall campus experience. But we'll focus a little bit more on the right quadrant. You can, of course, read more about each of these quadrants in the books or in the documents we've published. But of course, our main focus at OCLC was to know more about the academic library and how this was perceived. So again, a lot of the different attributes we see on the screen are associated with the library. We have highlighted in blue those attributes that are most strongly associated with the campus library. Out of this, we learned a few really important areas to pay attention to if we think about the future of both on-campus and online libraries. So what the consumers, again, those that are paying, told us about the library really can be summed up in their attitudes and beliefs that the library is a place where I can get the work done. And when they talked about technology tools, they talked about the basic technology tools to get their work done or about current and relevant information to get the work done again. So that's important for us to, as we move forward, since those are strong associations, getting the work done in libraries for, again, various reasons. We went a little deeper in the study in our questions related to libraries, and we asked people if they had to use the library when they were doing online learning, whether it was a degree or a non-degree course. So on the screen here are the numbers that said, yes, I use the library resources when taking online courses. So if you look under the degree classes on the left, 14% said they use a physical library. I don't think anyone would be very impressed and excited about these usage. 14 is not a high number. But I think you can be excited about it. And what was incredibly encouraging for us was that across the board, the users that used the library to assist with online learning were very satisfied with what they found. Many said the library was vital to get to success. As this particular quote says, one of the things that she really wanted to do was to have some flexibility away from campus and being able to access library resources online. That was critical for that person, and she was able to do that. But the question is, why are learners not using library resources when they're taking online classes? And that's really a key for us in libraries. For most, well, they said that the library simply just didn't come to mind. They didn't think about the library. Or, I didn't think it would be helpful. Or, back to the convenient factor again, they said, I was not sure it would be convenient or quick enough for me to do something remotely. Again, convenience is a key factor. So, thinking or hearing about convenience from the users, it's not surprising to conclude that they won't think libraries. If you remember some of the findings we did in previous reports at the OCLC, where for them, they were associating libraries with books, and books means print, not necessarily something online, right? So the quote here summarizes what most students think of library as having only books, as I've mentioned earlier. This is the library brand. This is something we have to live with. It's a strong perception and a strong affiliation that we work with and have to work with moving forward. So just again, to refresh your memory here with previous studies we've done, those were the results obtained in past studies at OCLC when we asked people that same top-of-mind question. What is the first thing you think about when you think of a library? So the numbers is pretty much the same all across the board. Started at 69% said that in 2005 to 75% in 2014. And this is probably why they don't necessarily think of libraries when they do online classes and courses. What can we do there? And I'll have a few suggestions towards the end, but let's keep with the study here, because we, in addition to that question, asked something else for the first time with this study. In the campus experience study, we asked the participants, if someone were to make a substantial gift in your name or your honor to the university, what building would you like to see your name put on? Well, equally split between the main library and the discipline-based building is where they would like to see their name, more so than for the sports arena, for example, or the gymnasium or something like that. So we were surprised by that, and when we look back at the comments, the verbatim again, we learned that it was because people know that a library is something that will last, that is important on campus, that has some endurance, and it has enduring qualities associated to it. So that is important. That's an important aspect, again, of the library brand in general. We need to recognize that it is really difficult to be enduring and current at the same time. That's a challenge we have to live with. We have to do that. We have to recognize that fact. But the perceptions as a place for books is something that is going to last over time, and that this is something we have to think about as a community and find ideas to balance those perceptions in a meaningful way moving forward. One of the things we realized since we've been tracking the library brand for 10 years is that we can now see some changes over time happening. Yes, books are the top perceptions, but when we did a review of the open-ended comments about the library from this study, something new became clear, which I'm going to call a settling of the library brand. What I mean by that is, in earlier years, we could classify differences in people's perceptions of the library based, for example, on their age. What we could say is that those who grew up with libraries, the older, grayer AR people, would often talk about libraries as books, but also talk about the warmth, or what I would call the nostalgia of the library brand, places for discovery, places where I would go with my children, that kind of comments. What we could also see in a study in earlier years from the younger age generation this time were things like, it's boring, I've never been there, kind of detached comments in general. Well, in this study, however, we are seeing a leveling of that down to basically books. So that's a bit positive, right? We're seeing what I would call a loss of nostalgia for the library by the older and the settling of the brand as simply books from the younger. So if this is a situation, a tipping point for learning and a settling of the library brand, what does that mean for us in libraries? What opportunities do we see as librarians, and as a community, and as campus leaders to really bring the benefits of this online revolution to the library? In our reports, when you read it, if you haven't read it, actually I should have asked that at the very beginning. Anybody has read that report? Let's skip that part. You started? Yeah. Oh, good. In some ways that's good. You're all learning today. So when you read it, hopefully you'll read it after the presentation, you'll see that we lean on views of some marketing experts towards our conclusion. We think it's important to look at how others have succeeded in taking and entering a loyal brand like books and keeping it current and relevant and what that might mean for us in libraries. So for positioning libraries in the future, it would appear that we need to focus on the idea of context, more precisely on how do we think about taking the library brand and our services, of course, and putting them into this new context of both the information consumer and the education consumer to continue making a difference and delivering values. One context in question is definitely what's called MOOCs, or Massive Online Open Courses. When we started the study in 2014, MOOCs was a very hot term in both the academic world and Wall Street, even Wall Street. We've seen less use of the term lately, but more platforms are being launched and used, and it's growing still. So I'm going to touch on this for just a minute, and maybe to look at it from a different lens or different angles. It's absolutely a new platform, and there are some innovations we should be watching. We look at MOOCs as massively interesting learning labs when we think about how do we participate and how do we lead and how do we help online learners in the process. The debate over whether MOOCs are a passing fad or a disruptor of higher education has been discussed for the past several years. Regardless of fad or disruptor, we see online learning changing the context of how we think about learning. Online learning providers are very aptly and very quickly adopting and using all of the marketing techniques that we have seen deployed on the web and are bringing them to education. So things like self-service, invitations versus applications to take a course, things like pushing out, if you like this course, perhaps you would like this type of course as well. That's happening in education too. I don't know if you know something called TEDx, but that's a very interesting site to look at there. Entirely different ways to think about how to set up my courses, how to find my courses, how to perceive what education might look like. If you do not know that site, take a look at TEDx or Corissa and think about how they are reframing how we think about education and how we think about the access to education and self-service. And of course, see how the libraries can fit in there. From all this, it looks like what we've called the laws of marketing are being applied to online education. The quote above is taken from a great book on marketing called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. We think there's a great opportunity for us as library leaders to think about some of these laws in libraries as this new world of education is being reshaped. And I know marketing is often a dirty word in libraries, but we have to do marketing. We have to promote our services to continue surviving on campus. One thing we're seeing with MOOCs is that maybe the quality isn't there, maybe the product isn't better, but being out there and leading and learning and shaping the context is what is going to drive the change. This is how libraries need to think of moving forward as much as possible as well. As we know, remaining relevant is going to be important. I've mentioned that quite a few times. Luckily, we are starting to see the nostalgia about libraries evolving and changing. That's good. As we're starting to see people think differently about both education and libraries, it is going to be important to be sure that we take what we have as great values and benefits in libraries and put all that into that famous context. Let me just illustrate this by an example. And that's in the document, I believe, as well, if I recall. It's a simple example to illustrate things into context. I know it may be oversimplistic, but I think it's really interesting a very interesting way for us to think about how do we do this. So those of you over, I'd say 40, I think, may recognize this ad, the TV dinner ad developed in 1953 by Swanson and Son. And so the story goes, truth or lore, I don't know, but during this time, Swanson, who made their living selling turkey, overbought for the Thanksgiving season and found themselves with a bunch of frozen turkeys. Of course, they had to figure out what to do with them. They just couldn't throw them away. They thought, why not package it with some vegetables and market it as ready-to-eat dinners, or what they called back then TV dinners, because at the time, TVs were getting very popular, more and more popular, and it was great to sit in front of the TV and eat. Right now, you try not to do that with your kids, right? A bit different. Well, if we roll the clock forward today, the TV dinner, what we now call the frozen dinners or different other things, this is a billion-dollar industry. Over the last 60 years, the meat and the vegetables have moved into different contexts. We started to have working families. We saw frozen lunches. And then we had a microwave, so that was a perfect match to get this into the microwave. But we see yet again meat and vegetables in a delightful-looking eating container, but the focus now is on health and convenience. So what we're saying is that it's not required as we think about bringing our brand forward to throw out the things that are valued or valuable about the brand, but we have to think about them and put them into a context that matters to the consumer that we're serving, to the end user. So learning on the work of those marketing experts, long-term work with, especially an individual name here, David Aker, who's done a lot of this type of brand portfolio, long-term work with organization. His advice to us are the following three things you're seeing on the screen. To remain relevant and to continue to grow, you need to be able to adapt your offerings to match the market dynamics. You need to energize your brand, or the brands that you have if you have more than one, and you need to find ways to differentiate it. But the differentiation is not necessarily by our products or the services, but differentiated by what users need, what users are telling you they want to see. So if we think about how do we differentiate our message to match what we know are the needs our end users are expecting today, we can think about ways to do that, some suggestions. We're not just suggesting right now that these are necessarily marketing campaigns you need to start, but let's name a few things for consideration. What we do want to share, though, is how do we think about messaging the differentiators that we know belong to the libraries and to put those into that famous context of today's online consumer. After all, we know what is important to the users. I've said it earlier. Getting the work done is what counts and is important. The trick maybe would be to positioning what we offer by probably not using the library word in all of this positioning or contextualization. So how can we do this? It's not obvious. We know it's important to get your work done. I've said that. And libraries can provide that sort of thing. So we could have things like suggested here. Some taglines here and there that says, to get your work done, we provide the tools. To get your work done, libraries can provide some expert support. You're the experts. those are these are examples of or a way to think about how we talk about all the wonderful, valuable things we do in libraries in general. Here's another example that I will share with you, but this time I will have the library word in all over the messages. We know again in context that today's end user's life is convenience. So as we know that libraries can deliver in a convenient way, we should emphasize that. So for the library to deliver, we can have messages such as, we can make house calls. We are online and we can be there at 2 a.m. There's ways to do that. Convenience matters to us because it matters to you, the user. We're online, and if you need some help, you can even text us. More and more libraries are interacting with their users this way as well. There's lots of ways to think about taking all the valuable and valued resources and putting those into a different context, really. So I thought I would conclude with one more thought. So we say this is a tipping point, but when is the tipping point coming? How fast do we need to move? Is it there? And how urgent are some of these conversations needing to happen in libraries? We think the answer to that question is not black or white. It depends on who you ask. I guess, unfortunately, in some ways, but let me explain what I mean by that. We did ask the following question in the survey. When do you think college students will be taking at least half of their classes online? And almost 50%, 46% exactly, of the current college students believe students will be taking at least half of their classes online within the next 5 years. If we contrast this result with another study, the Babson study done in 2014 with college administrators, these guys see online learning having an impact on campuses, but they don't see it happening at the same rate at all. 90% of them anticipate that within the next decade, 10 years, students will take at least one course online. So we got the students that are saying in 5 years, half of the courses, and then we have administrators that are saying in 10 years, at least one class. There's a bit of a disconnect here in these results, but if I had to bet on this, I think this would happen faster probably than slower. But for us in libraries, we need to listen to what the online consumer is telling us. We know the appetite is there. We know that the satisfaction is there. We had some of the results on the screen earlier. So I think this is going to move possibly faster than the college administrators are saying for sure. So in closing, I return to the idea that big change happens when three things align. What we put on this slide is just some evidence. We're seeing this really interesting alignment of the behaviors, the economic incentives to do something different, and the tools. Smartphones, tablets, online platforms, they're all there and they're all evolving very quickly. Today, we are empowered and able and incented to learn online if we want to. Changes have started, changes is coming. Are we ready in libraries? I'd like to hear you about that. Thank you very much.